you ever see him dressed as Santa Claus?
Oh yeah. So I was 10 years old and I didn't believe in Santa Claus anymore, and I was in my house. I was in my house in Kaysville, and I had given up on Santa Claus. I was 10 years old. I was too mature for Santa.
You were back on the Army stuff then.
Yeah, I was back in Army stuff. And there was a knock on the window in my little room there in Kaysville, and I opened it, and there's this guy standing out there with a big beard. I know my grandpa. He said. So I went around the front door and opened it, and he let me in, and he said, "Shh." He came in and sat down. "This is Santa Claus." He said, "I understand you don't believe in me anymore." Who told you that? It was my grandpa. I had no idea. Now, I'm 10 years old. You'd think I'd be smart enough. I was actually 9. I was going to be 10 in 4 more months. So it's Christmas. I was 9 years old. But I was going to be 10 in 4 more months, so it's 10 years old. So anyway, I did not recognize him. It was my grandfather. And he's there all dressed up. And he talked to me for a few minutes. He said, "No, don't tell anybody I was here." And he left. And that's my grandpa. Not for years later did I realize it was my grandpa. I believed in Santa Claus for another year or so. Oh, me. How naive could I be not to know that it wasn't my own grandfather? So, but for, as you all know, he played. You guys know better than I do. He played Grandpa or Santa Claus for I don't know how many years. So there you go.
ZCMI and the parades and
Yeah.
I think there's other stories. I just got to think about them.
He liked to dress up as different things. He'd dress up as Buffalo Bill.
Yep.
yeah, that's
And
a
wear
way.
those white
Leathers.
leather and ride headlines, and he'd dress up and he'd ride through the parades and stuff.
All you got to do is look at that tough face. Now, he died when he was 76, but he had that rough, tough face most of his life. And even though Richard a little while ago was showing a picture of him when he was a young man, he's a good-looking young man. But by the time he was 40, he had the face of a 70-year-old. I think that's from that hard life he lived, and he lived a hard life. I mean, this man never got past the 3rd grade, but he lived a hard life and trying to do the work of a man when he's 8 years old. And he told me one time, he said, "I never had a childhood." He told me, we were sitting talking, "What'd you do when you were a kid, Grandpa?" "I worked," he said. I never had a childhood.
He was a kid.
He never had a childhood. He was always working. But he had a great sense of humor.
Yeah.
And I can still hear him laughing. So.
I can tell you a story about his sense of humor. I was up here living with him, sleeping with Bill and Seymour, and for about a week or 10 days, and we went down to the field to milk the cows out in the field. You didn't bring them into the barn, you milked them right in the pasture. Of course, the cows were glad to be milked, so they were cooperative. But we filled 2 big buckets or 2 big milk cans full of milk, and had about a half a bucket left over, about a 2 or 3 gallon bucket, and about a half of it full of milk. And we came back up, and Bill and Seymour were putting the milk into the spring house out here where the barbecue pit is, and get it cooled down. And I'm standing there with this bucket of milk, and I asked Grandpa, "What do I do with this milk? Because it's not in a can." He says, "Feed it to the dogs." So I poured it out in the pan for the dogs, and boy, he lit up me on all 4 feet because I was pouring it out to the dogs. Well, he told me to do that. That was his sense of humor. He thought I would see the humor of it. I thought he was serious like he always is. I poured him out about a quart before he got me shut off. I never did that again. I never had a chance to see him angry. I never saw him angry. He was always like he is in this picture. Happy to see me, happy to see all the cousins, happy to see all his kids and his daughters. His sons he got to see every day because they were still living here. But the daughters were all married and scattered to the 4 winds, and And he was always glad to have them come back and bring their children, bring their husbands, and have a good time here in this old house. I don't remember him as Santa Claus, I never saw him in costume. I've seen pictures of him. I've heard stories about him being Santa Claus here and being Santa Claus there for years and years. But I do remember him as Buffalo Bill when he would ride, is it Headlights, the horse?
Yeah.
When he'd ride the horse, and he had all the regalia on the horse and all the regalia on him, and the beard, the goatee, and the mustache. He looked like I've always pictured Buffalo Bill must have looked like. So I was happy to know that he played the role. He played the role of an Indian as a young boy in 1911 or 1914, and we got a picture of him there.
Yeah, 14.
1914, he played an Indian, and he looks like an Indian. Would have thought, this is the way I want to look when I grow up. But he liked to play a role and liked to dress up and be part of the program. I used to dress up as a Civil War soldier, and then I went to Indian Wars. Later on, when I moved to deal with the Indians and stuff down south, I was an Indian Wars reenactor. But then it started out as a Civil War soldier. And people, you'd do it in front of a crowd and talk about this is the uniform and this is how the gun works, and etc. To go to schools and programs they'd have us on the square there in Logan. And people invariably would want to know two things. They want to know, isn't it warm in that uniform? Because you're wearing a wool jacket, a cotton underwear, and a cotton shirt. And if it was a little bit chilly, you wore a wool coat as well, long coat. Aren't you warm in that outfit? And actually you're not, because the cotton wicks the sweat away from your body, and then it evaporates out through the wool. You don't feel the heat, you don't feel the cold. But invariably that would be the first question they'd ask. The second question that they'd ask is, do you have ancestors that fought in the Civil War? And I'd say, no. All my ancestors were living out in Utah. They watched it on television. And they'd say, okay, and they'd go on. That was that time, and they'd stop and think about it. But you stop and think about all our ancestors were living out here in Utah. We weren't part of the Civil War, so we didn't have soldiers in the Civil War. I think the next war that family involved themselves in was World War I. I have ancestors in the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, but not until World War I was anybody in the family a soldier in the war. But I enjoyed that just like Grandpa did. I enjoyed playing the role, showing a little bit about what life was like in those days, so people had more understanding than just who died and who didn't, but what you died of maybe sometimes, or how you died, but not in the nitty-gritty. I appreciated it. So I enjoyed that. I don't know if I don't remember till Seymour started doing it, or Dee started doing Santa Claus, and kept up the tradition and did a beautiful job. I never saw him in Santa Claus suit either. But Grandpa had that old elk that he got out of the state capitol, and there was moth eaten, mice eaten, and he set it out here in the front yard and had a real nice, beautiful one-horse open sleigh that he hitched up to it, and that was part of his Christmas decoration. And I can remember people would stop along the street and take pictures, and they'd drive on, and the next car would pull up and stop.
Yep.
And thinking about what they used to do, I guess Seymour and Bill and Grandpa and Aunt Beck got tired of people stopping wanting to know if they could buy this field out here. across the road, from across the driveway. They wanted to build a house on it. They weren't looking for property. So finally, Grandpa put a sign out on the street. No, none of this property is for sale. They kind of slowed them down, and it still had a few people ask, but it slowed them down. And I see now the way my mother met my father was when they were building these flood viaducts or
Retention thing.
deep retentions. The CC boys would stack up the rocks, and Dad would push the caterpillar would push the dirt up against them and make a dam or make a ditch bank, and then they'd sluice all the water down through the floodgates under the road and out into the fields. But he did that all along here, and that's how he was building that one when he rode a caterpillar from the house over there, and took Mom for a ride on it. And she told her dad, I'm going to marry that guy. And sure enough, she did. She had the Rigby fortitude. She found and determined, and she did.
Yeah, I'm glad she did.
You know, they went from here on up to Idaho and along Swan Lake, up right on Swan Creek and up along Bear Lake area. But after they got married, two things I can remember about Grandpa particularly is I never heard him raise his voice to me. I come up here and lived with him for 3 weeks once, one summer. And then my dad gave me some money for spending money while I was here. $3 or $4 or $5, something like that. It was supposed to last me a couple of weeks. Well, we went downtown in Bountiful with Bill and Grandpa, and I saw this hobby shop, and I went in there, and they had all these models. Remember Strombecker models?
Yeah.
Hardwood, and they had to sand them down, paint them, and then had little decals you could put the windows in, and had a little tacks you could tack the propellers onto them and thing. I loved that store. I just stood with my mouth open, my eyes that big around, and so I come home and I wanted to go back and buy one of those Strombecker models of a Black Widow night fighter airplane. It was a two-engine plane with a single cockpit between the on the wing. There was two engines and a big wide tail. Called them fork-tailed devils or something like that. Anyway, I wanted to get that model. Grandpa didn't want me to spend my money on something frivolous like that. So he told me no, they weren't going to take me to town to buy that model. So I walked into Back then you could walk.
Sound like Richard, doesn't it?
You could walk 2 or 3 miles and nobody bothered you. They didn't offer you any rides either, but they didn't bother you. They didn't have to worry about child molesters or things like that. So I walked into town and bought the model and walked back. And I sat here on the porch and in this, what used to be a living room right here, and sanded it all down and painted it. I had to buy the paint, and it took just about $3 to buy that bottle. And he never said, "You wasted your money, kid." He didn't. I could see it in his eyes or in his face, but he never said it. He never detracted from me for what I'd done. But I always appreciated him as a man. I also inherited his white hair. You also see a few white hair in some of the Rigbys here. And,
Yep.
and that comes from Grandpa. I don't know where he got it from.
Yeah,
But-
exactly.
My son didn't inherit it because my wife's dad was bald-headed from his teenage years. And so he's lost his hair. He still has a little fringe around the bottom, but he cuts that off, shaves it off. But I've always appreciated the white hair. I appreciate the genealogy. I've studied a lot of genealogy all my life, all my recent life, and I've listened to the stories, and I've read the books and read the pamphlets and the histories, particularly the histories of John Rigby and his ancestors, the Phillips, both of them, and the Wrights. There's a Wright family involved in there back then too, but I don't think anywhere close related otherwise. But anyway, he came from good stock, good, hard-working, industrious stock. And he knew he was a family man, and he knew how to take care of his kids. He knew how to take care of his grandkids. He knew how to run the farm. They never lived on high on the hog, but they didn't do bad. And I got a little something I want to read here. My grandfather was a farmer, and he let me tell you, friends, that one fact I wouldn't change for all the might have beens, because he could have done most anything, and he'd have done, and he would have had success. But my granddaddy was a farmer, and I think he was the best. My granddad was a farmer, and for over 50 years he worked out our farm with sweat and blood and watered it with tears. My granddad was a farmer, and like farmers was not known by the 1,000 hungry kids who ate the food that he had grown. And he said he didn't matter as long as his family had enough. And thanks to him, we always did, and lots of other stuff. He said a farmer's got to struggle to make his livings from the earth. He said a farmer lived by faith, and he's got to work for all he's worth. My granddad was a farmer, so he's seen the power of God to make a crop or to take a crop from what he planted and sowed. And many's the summer, hot and dry, I've heard him call that higher power, and as he wiped his eyes, looked up the skies, and said, Lord, we could use a shower. My granddad was a farmer, and I guess he'll never stop till he lays those tired old body down. He'll keep making that one last crop. But Judgment Day, I hope he'll say that he's pleased with all he's done, that he was proud to be a farmer, and I'm proud to be his grandson. I thought that was very appropriate, because we all felt that, every one of us. There's not one of us here, or not even those that are not here, who are not proud of everything that Grandpa left for us, either in our genes, or in our minds, or hearts. He did a good job. I remember when his funeral, I was up here in the hospital to have I slugged a kid on the playground in Monticello and broke that knuckle on my hand. And they tried about 3 or 4 hours at the hospital in Monticello to repair it. They couldn't do it, so they sent me to Salt Lake and the St. Mark's, the old St. Mark's on North Temple, out by the refineries. And they had me in there overnight, and the next day they repaired it, and took me a little while to wake up, and they brought me out here and set me on this couch in the other room. And I laid there on that couch during the viewing. It was in here, this room. The viewing was in this room, and the funeral was down in it was probably in the church up here. What is up there, not the one that's down here, but the one that's up, that made into a children's school, some kind of a kid's school out of it. Anyway, that's where the church was. In all the years I've come up here, I never saw him as Santa Claus. I only saw him as Buffalo Bill. I knew about him as Santa Claus, certainly, because of articles in the newspaper, pictures that we all had and everybody had. And Beck had the Christmas tree sitting up in the room here until
Never
the
took
leaves
it
would all
down.
be falling on the floor, but there'd still be those branches and still have the bulbs on it. But so he was a big part of the family history, and he played a role. I mean, he knew how to act and knew how to convince people that he was the one. Just like Mike didn't realize that he was Grandpa. As much as he was around him, he didn't realize that he was Grandpa, because He probably looked 6 feet, 8 feet tall when he was standing there in the doorway after he knocked on his window. I do remember some good things and raising ponies. The little Seymour had ponies,
Yeah.
and then we go down there and play with the ponies, and he had pigs and had sheep. And I remember Bill had a Malamute dog, and the neighbor over here had sheep, and they got through the fence, and they were over here eating in his garden, I guess, and he thought he'd just spook them back through the fence. So he sicked his dog on them. He had 3 of them gutted before they could shut him off. He had to get rid of his dog, so he brought it up and gave him to me.
Oh man.
I loved that dog. He was a good dog, but he was a pulling dog. He was a sled dog, and as Malamutes are, all I could do was play with him a little bit in the evening, maybe on the weekend. But generally, he was chained in the backyard. He had a light chain, but it was still a chain. He was not happy, so I gave him away to a lady that had a sled, and she had a whole slew of dogs. And that dog made her lead dog. She made him the lead dog because he was such a good puller, and she sure appreciated him having that dog. But it's funny how you'll get attracted to animals. I know Grandpa liked horses. He liked cow. He always had they had a couple of oxen from Scotland up in here not so long ago.
Oh, no, they're not from Scotland. They're from there.
Yeah.
There were yaks.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought they were the
Yeah,
big horn.
that's what it was.
I thought they were big horned cattle from Scotland. Anyway, it's kind of been a good thing for the family to have those animals around. The sheep and Shetland ponies, or the ponies of America, I think they were.
We had those two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
2 different kinds.
The old farm's gone. It's a hill field now. This farm is pretty much narrowed down to just a few houses along the street here, and then Bill's house up in the back. And then they started building houses in that flood sluice. I can't figure who'd want to build a house where the floods come. I mean, they pushed these big banks up to make it, that's where it's going to channel, and they want to build a house in there. I never did understand that. Anyway, that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I'll hand the torch to you.